There was a rule in the Central Highlands. Simple, direct. 4 words that every helicopter crew heard at least once before flying into the valley. Do not touch it. Not the radios. Not the rifles. Not the boots still laced on the feet of the dead. The rule had no exceptions. It was not a guideline. It was not advice. It was survival compressed into a sentence. And the men who followed it came home. The men who didn't became part of the reason the rule existed. This is the story of how American soldiers learned that some wars are not fought with bullets. They are fought with patience, with cruelty, with the certainty that curiosity, compassion, or even instinct can be turned into a weapon. And in the mountains of Vietnam, the enemy had mastered all 3. Lieutenant Mark Holloway arrived in country in the spring of 1968. He was an intelligence officer assigned to an advisory team operating out of a fire base west of Pleiku. The fire base had a name, but the men called it something else. The waiting room, because that's what it felt like. A place where you sat, where you listened to the radio, where you watched the ridgelines and waited for something to happen. The heat in the valley was different from anything Holloway had known. It wasn't just hot, it was alive. It pressed against your skin. It filled your lungs. It made your uniform stick to your shoulders and your thoughts slow down like syrup poured over gravel. And the smell, red dirt, diesel fuel, smoke from cooking fires in the villages below, and underneath it all, something else. Something faint and rotten that you couldn't name but learned to recognize. The fire base sat on a hill that had been cleared with bulldozers and Agent Orange. Nothing grew there anymore. Just red clay and sandbags and concertina wire that gleamed in the sun like frozen lightning. At night, you could hear mortars in the distance, not close enough to worry about, close enough to remember they were out there. Holloway's first briefing was in a sandbagged bunker that smelled like mildew and motor oil. The briefing officer was a captain named Richie. He had been in country for 11 months. His eyes were flat. His voice was steady. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has said the same words too many times. "You're going to see things out there that don't make sense," Richie said. "Gear left behind, weapons in the open, bodies that haven't been moved. You're going to want to check it. You're going to want to help. You're going to want to understand." He paused. "Don't." Holloway waited for more. There wasn't more. "That's it?" he asked. Richie looked at him the way you look at someone who hasn't learned the language yet. "That's it," he said. "Touch it and die." Holloway had heard warnings before. Safety briefings. Rules of engagement. Don't drink the water. Don't trust the tree line. Standard stuff. But something about the way Richie said it made him understand that this wasn't standard. This was something else entirely. "What happens if you do touch it?" Holloway asked. Richie pulled a folder from under a stack of maps. He opened it and slid a photograph across the table. Holloway looked down. The photograph showed what used to be a man. Parts of him, anyway. Scattered across a dirt road in pieces too small to identify. A boot, a hand, something that might have been a rib cage. "That's what happens," Richie said. "That's what happens when you pick up a radio you find in the grass, when you turn over a body to check for documents, when you open a door that's already been opened." He closed the folder. "The enemy knows what we'll do. They know we're trained to recover equipment, to render aid, to investigate. So they make those things kill us." Holloway stared at the folder. "How long has this been going on?" "Long enough," Richie said. "Long enough that most of the men who didn't learn are dead." The first time Holloway saw the rule in action, he was in a Huey flying low over a stretch of jungle north of the firebase. The door gunner was a kid from Ohio named Kern. He'd 20 years old, sunburned neck, hands that never stopped moving. He had been in country for 7 months, which made him ancient by the standards of helicopter crews. They were doing a low pass over a clearing when Kern pointed down. "There!" he shouted over the rotor noise. "You see that?" Holloway leaned out. Below them, half hidden in the elephant grass, was an M16, just sitting there, barrel up, stock in the dirt. "Somebody dropped it," Holloway said. Kern shook his head. "Nobody drops their rifle." The pilot circled once, twice. The rifle didn't move. There was no one near it. No signs of a firefight, no blood. Just the weapon, alone in the grass like it had fallen from the sky. "We should mark it," Holloway said. Kern looked at him. "We should leave it. It's U.S. NICS equipment. It's bait." The word hung in the air between them. The pilot banked hard and headed back to base without landing. Holloway didn't argue, but he didn't understand either. Not yet. The valley slipped past below them, green and brown and silent. From the air, it looked peaceful, like you could land anywhere and be fine. But Holloway was learning that the valley was a liar. It showed you one thing and hid another. That night, over warm beer in the hooch, he asked Kern why they hadn't recovered the rifle. Kern took a long drink. "Because if we had, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation." "What do you mean?" "I mean they leave things. The VC, the NVA. They leave things they know we'll want. Radios, weapons, medical kits. Anything that looks valuable or useful or like it shouldn't be there. And then they wait. For what? For us to touch it." Kern set the beer down. His hands were steady, but his eyes weren't. "Last month, a patrol found an M60 lying next to a trail. Clean. Oiled. Belt still in the feed tray. They thought it was a gift from God. Figured some grunt had dropped it running from contact. The squad leader sent his RTO to grab it." He stopped. "And?" "And the medic collected what was left in 2 ponchos." Holloway felt something shift in his chest, a coldness that hadn't been there before. "They rigged the gun?" "They rigged the gun. Probably watched us use them enough times to know exactly how we'd pick it up, how we'd check it, where we'd put our hands, and they wired it accordingly." Jesus. Jesus doesn't come to this valley. "Lieutenant, if you've never heard stories like this, the kind that don't make it into the official histories, consider subscribing. There are wars within wars, rules that aren't written down, and men who learn them the hard way. The trap wasn't complicated. That was the terrible beauty of it. You didn't need electronics. You didn't need timers or remote detonators. You needed patience. You needed an understanding of human nature. And you needed to know what American soldiers valued. They valued their equipment. They valued their wounded. They valued intelligence. They valued routine. And all of it could be weaponized. A rifle left in the grass. A radio with the squelch open. A helmet with a name written on the band. A pair of boots that still looked new. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army knew that American soldiers were trained to recover their dead and wounded. That they were trained to secure enemy equipment. That they were trained to investigate anomalies. So they made the anomalies the trap. A body left in the open wasn't just a body, it was a pressure plate. A wire ran from the corpse to a buried shell. Pick up the man, and the shell detonated. Not just under him, under you. A canteen hanging from a branch wasn't forgotten. It was tied to a grenade. Lifted off the hook, and the pin came free. A door left open in an abandoned village wasn't an invitation. It was a tripwire. Step through, and the door frame collapsed inward, bringing the roof and everything tied to it down on your head. Sometimes the trap was even simpler. A trail that looked clear. A path that looked safe. Footprints that led into the tree line and didn't come back out. Follow them, and you'd find in a punji pit. Sharpened bamboo stakes smeared with human waste. Deep enough that you couldn't climb out. Sharp enough that you didn't want to try. Or you'd find nothing at all. Just jungle. Just silence. And then the men watching you would open fire from 3 sides, and you'd realize too late that the footprints were the bait and you were standing in the kill zone. Holloway read the reports, casualty summaries, after-action reviews. The language was clinical. Inadvertent detonation of hostile ordnance. Injuries sustained during equipment recovery. KIA while rendering aid. But the truth was simpler. Men died because they touched things they shouldn't have touched. And the enemy knew they would. Because American soldiers were predictable. They followed their training. They followed their instincts. They did what they were supposed to do. And in the valley, doing what you were supposed to do could get you killed. There were soldiers who learned the rule early, who internalized it, who stopped seeing the battlefield as a place where things made sense, and started seeing it as a place where everything was suspect. They stopped picking up souvenirs. They stopped investigating. They stopped trusting their instincts, because their instincts were American instincts, and this was not an American war. Holloway watched it happen to the men around him. The way they moved through villages with their hands in their pockets or locked behind their heads. The way they stepped over equipment without looking down. The way they walked past wounded enemy soldiers and kept walking. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival. But it changed them. You could see it in their faces, in the way they talked, in the way they didn't talk. They became quieter, harder, less willing to assume anything was safe. One afternoon, Holloway was on patrol with a rifle squad moving through a hamlet that had been shelled the night before. The houses were still standing, but the people were gone. Smoke rose from a cook fire that no one had put out. In the center of the hamlet, near the well, was a bicycle, old, rusted, handlebars bent. The squad leader, a sergeant named Phelan, stopped the patrol 20 meters away. "Anybody touch that?" he asked. No one answered. "Good. We're going around." A young private, new in country, maybe 3 weeks, spoke up. "Sarge, it's just a bike." Phelan didn't look at him. "It's never just a bike. It's not even near anything. It's just sitting there. That's why we're not touching it." The private looked confused. "I don't understand." Phelan turned and looked at him, really looked at him. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, patient, the way you'd explain something to a child. "That bike has been sitting there all morning. Nobody moved it. Nobody took it. In a village where people take everything, that bike is still there. You know why?" The private shook his head. "Because they know better. Because they know what we don't. Which is that the moment you touch that bike, something bad happens. Maybe it's wired. Maybe it's not. But I'm not finding out, and neither are you." They went around. Wide. The private didn't argue. Later, after they had cleared the hamlet and set up for the night, Holloway asked Phelan if he really thought the bicycle was rigged. Phelan shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I think. Matters what I know. I know that in this valley, the moment you decide something is harmless is the moment it kills you. So you never investigate anything?" "I investigate everything. From a distance. With my eyes. With a pole. With a boot on a rope if I have to. But I don't touch it. I don't trust it. And I don't assume." He looked at Holloway with the same flat expression Richie had worn in the briefing bunker. "You assume, Lieutenant, and you end up in a body bag with a toe tag that says hostile ordnance." Holloway watched Phelan walk away. The man moved differently than he had 3 months ago. His shoulders were tighter, his head on a swivel. He looked at everything and trusted nothing. It was the look of a man who had survived by becoming someone else. It happened on a resupply run in late June. A Huey carrying mail, rations, and ammunition landed at a landing zone on the edge of the valley. The crew chief, a specialist named Cormier, hopped out to help unload. The zone was quiet. No contact in 3 days. The perimeter was secure. Cormier had been in country for 4 months. Long enough to know better. Long enough to have heard the stories, but not long enough to have seen it himself. He was halfway through unloading when he saw it. A rucksack, sitting at the edge of the tree line. American issue. Straps still buckled. The canvas was clean. Too clean. He called it out to the door gunner. "Got a pack over here. Looks fresh." The gunner, a man named Torres, Bailly, walked over. He looked at the rucksack. He looked at Cormier. "Leave it. Could be somebody's gear. Could have intel. Could have a lot of things." But Cormier was already moving toward it. Not running, not rushing, just walking. Curious, confident. The way men walk when they think they know what they're doing. Torres shouted, "Cormier, stop!" Cormier didn't stop. He crouched down. He reached for the strap. And in that moment, the half second before his fingers touched the buckle, Torres saw something in Cormier's face. A flicker of doubt. A moment where he almost pulled back. Almost. The explosion was not large. It didn't need to be. The rucksack had been packed with a small charge, maybe a quarter-pound of plastique, wired to the buckle. When Cormier lifted the strap, the circuit completed. The blast caught him in the chest and face. He was dead before he hit the ground. Torres was 10 feet away. He caught shrapnel in his legs and chest. He lived, but he never flew again. The fragments tore through muscle and shattered bone and left him with a limp that would follow him for the rest of his life. The rest of the crew pulled him into the Huey. They left Cormier where he fell. Not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't risk it. Because they didn't know if the rucksack was the only trap. Because the tree line was too close, and the LZ was too hot, and they had already lost one man to curiosity. They flew back to base with Torres bleeding on the floor and Cormier's body still lying in the grass. The after-action report listed the cause of death as hostile booby trap. It did not say what Holloway knew. It did not say that Cormier had been warned. It did not say that he had ignored the rule. It did not say that the rucksack had been placed there specifically because someone knew an American would find it, and that an American would touch it, because that's what Americans did. By the end of the summer, Holloway had stopped counting. The incidents blurred together. A canteen, a helmet, a radio, a medic bag left in the middle of a trail with the Red Cross still visible. Each one a trap. Each one designed to exploit kindness, duty, or curiosity. And the men adapted. They became harder, colder. They learned to walk past things that should have been recovered. They learned to ignore their training. They learned to suppress the part of them that wanted to help, to understand, to fix. Because in the valley, that part of you could get you killed. Holloway noticed it in himself. The way he no longer looked twice at abandoned equipment. The way he stopped asking questions. The way he moved through the world with his hands at his sides, touching nothing unless he absolutely had to. He noticed it in the way he talked to new arrivals. The way he gave them the same briefing Richie had given him. The same flat voice. The same 4 words. Touch it and die. And he saw the same confusion in their faces, the same questions, the same disbelief. They didn't understand, not yet, but they would. It was effective, it was survival, but it was also a kind of death. Not the kind that came quick and violent, the kind that came slow, the kind that hollowed you out and left you walking around with nothing inside. Holloway started dreaming about the valley, not nightmares, not exactly. Just images. A rifle in the grass, a bicycle near a well, a rucksack at the edge of the tree line. And in every dream, he reached for it. And in every dream, he stopped himself. And in every dream, he woke up sweating and shaking and wondering how many times he'd have to stop before it stopped being a choice. There was a medic named Fletcher who had been in country for 13 months. Holloway met him at the fire base in August. Fletcher was thin, gaunt. He moved like his bones hurt, but his hands were steady and his eyes were clear, and when he spoke, people listened. One night, over a canteen of warm water that tasted like iodine, Holloway asked him how he'd lasted so long. Fletcher smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. "I stopped caring," he said. "About what?" "About saving people." Holloway waited. "I used to run to every man who went down," Fletcher said. "Didn't matter if it was safe. Didn't matter if it made sense. That's what I was trained to do. That's what medics do." He paused. "Then one day I ran to help a man who'd been hit. He was lying in the middle of a field. No cover, just open ground. And I got to him, and I rolled him over, and I saw the wire." "Under him?" Fletcher nodded. "Under him. Ran from his chest to a shell buried in the dirt. They'd shot him, left him alive, waited for someone like me to come help." "What did you do?" "I ran, fast as I could. Made it maybe 10 meters before it went off. Killed the man I was trying to save. Damn near killed me." He took a drink. "After that, I learned. I learned to check. I learned to wait. I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for a man is nothing." "That's not what they taught us." "No," Fletcher said, "it's not. But that's what this war teaches you. That the things you're supposed to do can be used against you. That your training is a weakness, that your compassion is a weapon." He looked at Holloway. "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" "It works. The traps work. Not because we're stupid, but because we're good. Because we do what we're supposed to do. Because we care." He set the canteen down. "And they know it. They know that we'll try to save our wounded, that we'll recover our equipment, that we'll investigate, and they use it against us. Every single time." Holloway didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. If this kind of story matters to you, if you want to hear more about the wars that were fought in shadows and silence, subscribe before you go. These stories don't get told often, and the men who live them are running out of time to tell them. Holloway rotated out in the spring of 1969. He flew out of Pleiku on a C-130, surrounded by men who looked like him. Tired, quiet, eyes that didn't focus on anything in particular. He thought about Cormier, about Torres, about the private who had asked why they went around the bicycle, about all the men who had learned the rule too late, and he thought about the ones who had learned it early, the ones who survived. They had become something else. Not better, not worse, just different. Men who understood that in some wars, the enemy doesn't wait for you in the open. He waits in the things you trust, in the objects you reach for without thinking, in the instincts that are supposed to keep you alive. And the only way to survive is to stop trusting anything at all. Holloway carried that understanding home with him. He carried it through the airport in San Francisco, where people spat at him and called him baby killer. He carried it through the years that followed, through jobs and marriages, and children who never understood why their father didn't like to talk about the war. He carried it every time he saw something out of place, every time he noticed an object that didn't belong, every time his hand moved towards something and stopped halfway. Touch it and die. The rule followed him. It still does. Years later, Holloway would try to explain it to people who hadn't been there. He would tell them about the rule, about the traps, about the way the jungle itself became hostile. And they would nod, They would say they understood, but they didn't. Because you can't understand a war like that unless you've lived it. Unless you've stood in the heat, and the stink, and the silence, and looked at something as simple as a water bottle lying in the dirt, and known that picking it up could be the last thing you ever do. Unless you've watched men die for doing what they were trained to do. Unless you've learned that survival means becoming someone you don't recognize, the rule still follows him. Even now, even decades later. Touch it and die. 4 words, a lifetime of meaning, and a war that never really ended.